Seneca says, I don't have an American identity, or I don't have a Mexican identity or an American one. I'm just a person. I think that my identity has more to do with my personality and not with my origins. If someone asks me about my ethnicity and I tell them that I'm Mexican, they automatically think I'm stupid, lazy, and alcoholic. They automatically think they can flirt with me. I visit Mexico and Mexicans tell me that I don't act Mexican. Americans tell me I don't act American. I'm criticized in both countries, in both cultures. So I end up being myself, the person I was meant to be. My parents are indigenous. I am indigenous too. People often accuse me of looking Mexican but having white ideas. I was born in Mexico, but I'm not sure where I belong. If I have to choose an American term, I would choose to be identified as Hispanic or Latina. These are terms that America understands, words that help America defines me. I'm no different from a person of Colombia or a person from North Dakota. There are no borders or boundaries. We're just people who share the world. When I am asked to check a box which defines who I am, I choose to leave it blank. My daughter always calls herself an American. She jokes around sometimes and says she's a Canadian.
Our first question is about wherever you were born, where do you put your we? And the reason this came up was we have one of our contributors is in San Antonio, Texas, and she gave a reading there and had a panel of recent immigrants. And we were developing some questions for her to ask. And we ended up in this conversation about, when did you use we? And it was interesting. She's a community college professor, and she said, well, you know, it's interesting. Sometimes I use we when I'm talking about American history, about something that we didn't do very well, you know, like slavery, or so it was an interesting place. Where does one tend to use we, and when? Do you ever say like we Americans, or we living here, or no?
I do sometimes.
You do? Okay. Okay. Do you know what situations you would say that?
Yeah, like, for instance, if I'm expressing generally, like, for instance, I can say, okay, we Africans or we Sierra Leoneans, or stuff like that. I use the we because it simplifies all of us.
And do you say we Americans as well sometimes?
No, I've never used we Americans.
Can you imagine a time when you might?
I do, but not yet.
Could you share with people what you did today?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I went to apply for my citizenship. They were asking me some few questions about the United States, like preparing me for the test.
Okay.
Preparing me for the lesson test, and I go through some few interviews with them concerning the ongoing questions and see which area that I need to do well and which area I'm going to get okay with and stuff like that. And then go back from back home, you know, before you came to the United States, everybody had to go to an interview. So they take you back home to the interview that you did to make sure whether you still record whatever you were interviewed, because you have to go to FBI and all those stuff. And all those interviews are still in the system. And you have to make sure whatever you have said in the beginning is still the same. Nothing changed.
Yeah, I think I use we when speaking to my relatives or family members. We often talk about the traits of the Iranians in general and what we're like. But also, I guess as part of my job, I sometimes use we when I mean the U.S. government. So, as you were saying, usually it's in the context of criticism, that it's, we've done something wrong to other peoples of the world or peoples here in this community, which I guess what I'm really trying to say is the government, perhaps with our tacit support, has done this or that.
I tend to use the we a lot when I'm talking about specifically the South Asian community, or when I'm aligning with the South Asian community, or I find myself, you know, playing the educational role of telling people what the South Asian community is like. So I'll say, we do this or don't do that, or this is what we believe. I can't say I've ever said we Americans. Even now as a citizen, it feels odd for me to put that on, to say we Americans. That's still not something that naturally rolls off of my tongue. Even when I'm in India playing, in India as well, I play the role of the other. So I tend to say, well, no, you know, Americans aren't like that. I always say Americans aren't like that, not we aren't like that. I still put myself in with the we as in Indians.
Very interesting.
And we are very interested in opening it up to everyone. You have your own experiences both with this particular question or other things that have come up for you during the reading, please.
I was going to say, I never use the word we when discussing the crimes of the United States. I make a very clear differentiation that the we're we. But when the U.S. does something, I never say we went to war, because we, in my opinion, didn't go to war. So that's very interesting to me about how my differentiation of that we is very political. And I will not align myself with this U.S. government, no matter whatever it's doing. So like, I worked for General Motors, and there was a big deal about how we were all a team. Well, that never flew with me. So I make a very clear distinction between, I might say we, meaning any nationality of people, you know, who are fighting or struggling. But I will never, ever place myself as part of the we of the U.S. government.
Well, it's interesting. I wonder whether sometimes you have to be outside it to be able to feel that there's a we. You know, like when I traveled, there was a period where we were in Argentina for extended periods of time. So there was a period when Bush was president and the U.S. was not popular. And you had to block out an extra 10 minutes for every taxi ride because the taxi drivers were so mad. And they had to tell you exactly what they felt about the U.S. and what they felt about Bush. And I would say, and I felt as an American it was my job to listen. So in a certain weird way, I had a we there, and then I would say to the taxi driver, well, you know, we really don't want to be in a position where we have to justify our presidents, do we? I mean, can we think of, you know, and then I would name their last president, who was not exactly stellar either. And, you know, and then we would sort of nod at each other, yeah.
I'm from Argentina. I so know what you're talking about. Oh my gosh. I grew up undocumented in this country, and I got my residency halfway through high school. And I grew up in a really homogeneous white community. And I've never, and then I went and married a white man whom I love, and I never feel, my we is always Latina, always, and always Argentine, because every Latina country has their own crazy sense of we, and it's so funny because, and I'm also a social worker and an activist, which are the roles that, aside from woman, Latina, and mother, I always invite, and even as a social worker, I work with a lot of social workers, work with Amistad Nazare, and we all organize a lot. And even as a social worker, when I go into schools and do the work that I do, I still feel like I'm a social worker, but I'm Latina. So there's a whole otherness of information that I have, especially now with the immigration and working in such a Latina community now. But it's funny, I never really thought about it. I never take the we as me being an American, and I've been here, I grew up here. But I was raised in such a Latina way, in such an Argentine, very politicized family. But even when I go back, I'm always still, you know, all Americans aren't like that, but I get what you're saying, and then you remind them of Menem and the other presidents and all, and you know, their history as well, their sordid history with corruption. But it's always interesting that as a social worker, I always feel working with Latinos here, that I can't even identify with colleagues that are also social workers, because it's like, no, there's this whole other dimension when you're a social worker and you're Latina. As I imagine, if you're an African and you're a social worker and you work in your own community, there's still such a separateness that others. And in my husband's family, who's very Midwestern, small country family in Michigan, or large in a small country, large family in a small town, they don't understand at all why I don't want to identify as American. But you're a citizen, you took the oath, and they get very, very upset, and that I kept my name, and that all that stuff is just, it's very palpable for them that I don't identify as American, even though I might say, well, why are you here? And it goes back to that whole thing. Why don't you people go home if you don't want to be American? You want to come here but not change anything. It gets ugly, and it's.
So how do you respond to that?
You know, I always say that it's, you know, I always say you guys are very, the viewpoint here is very narrow because you guys aren't exposed to a multicultural community at all. The only Latinos that you guys are used to seeing are the people working in the migrant fields or the people getting a DUI, a ticket, because one of my sisters-in-law works for the county clerk, and it's, again, it's very affirming to what they think they know is true about others in this country. So just like when I go to Argentina, I end up hearing and having to sit through when I'm with my husband's family, and he does the same thing, you know, on my behalf. It's like, it's not what you think. Like, your image of Latinos is so different, is so narrow than what the world knows of Latinos. Like, we are educated. Like, I'm the only person they know that didn't work in a migrant farm, but that is Latina. Like, there's the problem. It's not, you know, and so it gets very complicated. And then how do I identify my children? I have 3 kids, and so, like, what are you gonna, are they gonna be American or are they gonna be Latina? It's like, you have to choose. So there's always that element.
Does anybody else here have an experience where they use we, or they're sort of aware of where it fluctuates for them?
I use we a lot, even if I'm not part of the culture. For instance, if I want to criticize something, I would use we to kind of soften the way. That way it doesn't sound like a threat. So, and also I'm not American, but I live here. And before I lived in the Middle East, so I feel comfortable using the we and different cultures despite the fact that I may not look like a particular one.
I'd like to say something. I think, first of all, I'm really happy to be an American. And then I also respect you ladies and admire your tenacity, and I see the struggle that you went through, and that struggle in itself teaches people about appreciating being American, if you can understand what I'm saying. And even though our history, African American history, and thinking back on some of the things that we went through that were a little alienation, I still see the we in being American. I remember as a child almost being ran over, you know, but thank God he had me turn around to see what was coming behind me, of young men who were just barreling ahead to run over me, you know. And so, but being an American citizen, that's part of the history, you know, that's part of the history of America. But it doesn't alienate me from my citizenship, you know. It's something that we have overcame. It's something that we have had happen to us in the past that made America, or how people treated you, be. There's ugly parts of every society. And as a human being, forgiving those things and moving forward and being compassionate about every human being. The we to me is right-minded thinking people, you know, whoever they are. You know, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mary.
You're
That's
welcome.
great.
Our panelists, would you like to respond to anything that anybody has said, or did it bring anything up for you that you would like to express at this point?
You know, after taking my citizenship in response to identifying as an American, it's a skin that I've been conscious about trying on. It doesn't come naturally to me. It's something that I have to make an effort to say, okay, I'm an American now, like an official U.S. passport carrying, U.S. citizenship American. And I understand what you're saying about being able to see the we in others, about being able to recognize that that's how community is formed. Like, I need to be able to see myself in others, and others need to be able to see me in them. I think the barrier for me comes up is when, I'll give you an example. In my classes right now, I'm taking a business communication class. My professor at the end of class, asked me, where I was from, and I said New York, and immediately his response was, well, no, what's your ethnic background? And it's Indian, and I'm not ashamed of admitting that, but it's a question that other people have of me, and that is always a constant reminder that even were I to wear the skin of being American naturally, others would point out to me that, well, actually you can pretend it's natural, but it's not. So that's where I am in that whole definition of myself, which is being very aware of the fact that even if I were to take this on, it's something that other people, I don't think, would be able to see it in me.
It is a very interesting one, and in Complex Allegiances we hear a lot more of that. One of the couples there, he's Korean born in the States, his parents were immigrants. He's married somebody from Korea. And so that second question we had, which came up when we were talking with Natalia, which is the experience that you have coming here and being asked, where are you really from? Okay, who are you really? And what is that? And that can be, you can be asked that by people inside the ethnic group that you're in. For example, our Mexican contributor, it was Mexicans, second or third generation Mexicans, who gave her a tougher time almost than the Anglos there. So in terms of her trying to understand where she was going to locate her we, she had a lot of energy on both sides of it. The young Korean man that we talked to would say, if I were not Korean in body, which to me was the most poignant thing, and his wife would joke, you're a banana, you're yellow on the outside and white on the inside. But she would also point out he was far more sensitive to anything about being Asian than she was. She felt she'd grown up in Korea in a totally homogeneous society. She was totally comfortable being Korean, and he was desperately uncomfortable on both sides. And so, but that came from being here and being one of the first Korean families in Queens, one of the first Korean families in Long Island. Later there would be many more, but at that point he wasn't. And so that question for native born of what are the things, both sides, what happens when somebody refuses to say we? What do you do naturally if somebody will not say we with you? Something happens to your willingness to connect. And on the other hand, if somebody's always reminding you, where did you really come from? Who are you really? What would that do? And so that, for us, that's part of the reason we're very into this project is what do we do there? How do we begin to say those things under the same roof so that people can hear, ooh, what would that feel like?